I've been saying that Christian nationalism is to Christianity as Zionism is to Judaism. That that ethnic cleansing and genocide is the natural outgrowth of both of these triumphalist, exceptionalist, and racist ideologies, Christian nationalism and Zionism. And so I've been saying too that it frustrates me that while many liberals rightly protest what's happening in our country in the No Kings protests and others, Zionism seems to get a pass. Greetings, everyone. My name is Michael Spath, and I'm the Executive Director of the Indiana Center for Middle East Peace in Fort Wayne, Indiana. I'm also on the boards of both Friends of Hebron with Isa Amro and ICAD USA with Jeff Halper. We're a voice of conscience for peace, justice, human rights, and intercultural encounter. Susan Birndorf is a clinical psychologist specializing in anxiety and depression and a member of Jewish Voice for Peace Indianapolis. Sara Ofner Seals is associate pastor at Plymouth Congregational Church, United Church of Christ in Fort Wayne, and a member of the steering committee of the UCC's Movement for Palestinian Solidarity. Both traveled with me to Palestine this past May. So Susan and Sara, welcome.
Thank you.
You know, it's hard to believe that today is day 800 since October 7th, 2023. Israel's genocidal assault on Palestine. Tens and tens of thousands dead, many of them women and children. 90% of structures, homes, churches, schools, hospitals destroyed, and hundreds of thousands injured. As you know, I've been saying that it's more than a war on Gaza or even the Palestinian people. It's a war on Palestinian culture and history, a war on the very idea of Palestine itself, an attempt to erase Palestine from human memory. We see Israel's genocidal agenda not only in Gaza, but in the West Bank too. So, just as opening comments, maybe your thoughts on day 800. Susan and then Sara.
Oh, well, as you say, first of all, it's hard to believe that this is continuing. Um, I think that one of the the disheartening things for me is that um, I feel, and I may be wrong, but I feel like some interest is waning, energy is waning, let's put it that way. Um, I feel like more people are coming around to the side of Palestinians and understanding, but we notice there are less people at some of our actions and some of our um, our protests, and I worry that it's fading a bit, from the public view, as other things in the world are happening as well.
Thank you, Susan. Sara?
Yeah, I would just add to that. I think one of the reasons why interest has faded over the last month or so is because of the so-called ceasefire that was announced, which there is no ceasefire in Gaza right now. Nearly 400 Palestinians have been killed since the ceasefire began. There have been over 500 violations of the ceasefire, at least on Israel's part. There has not been, before the ceasefire was announced, there was a huge outpouring of concern for the Palestinians who were starving. The media was covering, starving children in Palestine. Celebrities were making a lot of noise, and even a lot of Jewish communities and rabbis were coming out and saying this has got to stop. And a ceasefire was announced, and people expected that that would alleviate suffering, and they kind of went back to back to whatever it was they were focusing on before. And unfortunately, the level of aid that has been let into Gaza has been paltry. I don't know how many people are aware that over the last few days, there's been intense winter storms in Gaza. Tents are flooded, thousands of tents collapsed. People have no shelter from the cold weather and from the rain. And Israel is not allowing things like sturdier tents, motor homes, tent poles, in addition to all the things that were needed before, such as food and medicine and fuel. So there is no ceasefire in Gaza, and I think a lot of people aren't really aware of that, and that's part of the reason why, Susan, um, the interest isn't what it had been.
Thanks, Sarah. As we begin this webinar today, um, I want you to share your stories. I began my journey as a Palestinian activist in 1998 when I met Zugbi and Sami Awad. I'd previously been a student of various religious traditions, involved in interfaith dialogue, including Jewish Christian dialogue, a member of the Friends of Tibet. So I had an activist bent to what I was doing. But you have your own journeys to your solidarity with Palestinians. And so take a few minutes, each one of you, and just share with us your journey to Palestinian solidarity. Sarah, would you begin?
Sure. Well, I've always been passionate about peace and justice and social justice and issues of human rights and civil rights, and that has been a part of who I am as a Christian for as long as as long as I've been active as an adult in the church. Uh, However, I would say I was pretty ill-informed, pretty ignorant of what was going on in Palestine until just a few years ago. I knew a little bit. I knew that there was a wall around Bethlehem. I knew that Palestinians lived under oppressive circumstances, but that was about the extent of my knowledge. And so for me, what happened was going on your trip, Michael, in June of 2023 and spending 2 weeks in the West Bank and in parts of Israel, and just seeing things with my own eyes, meeting the people there, hearing their stories, seeing their resilience and their steadfastness in to act nonviolently for peace and justice in their land. Um, I fell in love with Palestine when I visited there the first time, but it also broke my heart. And I've heard many a contemplative, spiritual person say something to the effect of, if you want to know what is yours to do in this world, pay attention to what breaks your heart and follow that. And I felt my heart break a million times when I was in Palestine that first time. And I talk about how I feel like I left pieces of my heart there. And so that's really what has it lit a fire in me 2 years ago. And then, of course, shortly after we got back from that trip, October 7th happened. And so it it became more urgent um, in the last 2 years because of that.
Thank you, Sarah. Susan?
Well, my story is very different than Sarah's story. I'm Jewish, and I was raised in a very conventional Jewish home. Not terribly religious, but with a religious background. My grandparents were religious. I think my father fell away a little bit. Um, but what I have called myself an accidental Zionist. Because I just grew up in the Jewish community. And as a result, I just accepted that Israel was wonderful and great for the Jews. That was always, is it good for the Jews? That's what, it was always the standard joke, but a kernel of truth in it. And when I was in college, after my first year, I had an interest in a study program in Israel called Summer in Kibbutz. And I was more interested in the communal living aspect of it, um, the kibbutz life. And so I went to Israel for 8 weeks. And like Sarah, I fell in love with Israel. I didn't even think of, Palestine. That was not even on my radar. Um, and and then 2 years later, I went back and stayed for 4 months on a kibbutz. And so I spent a lot of time in Israel, and loved the country. I was completely ignorant of what was happening. So unlike Sarah, I had no idea in what was going on. I followed and swallowed the Israeli propaganda Hasbara hook, line, and sinker. I just thought it was a wonderful country, and I had no idea what was going on with the Palestinians. So 9 years ago, my daughter, um, who is about Sarah's age, became very involved with um, Israel and Palestine and Jewish Voice for Peace. And she started talking with me. And I came from a background, my great grandparents and three of my grandfather's siblings were killed in the Holocaust. My grandfather and two brothers came over here, begged them to come, and they wouldn't come, and they died. So I was born after the war, but it was very much a part of my life. My grandfather at our seders would open the Haggadah and he would cry. I could see the tears streaming down his cheeks, and so the Nazis and the Holocaust and the idea that we needed a place was part of my life until my daughter got a hold of me and she started talking about Palestine and what was happening. And it was at that point that I gave her the spiel about, yes, but we need a place of safety. And we got into a kind of a tussle and we agreed. She said, okay, we're just not going to talk about it. And I said, well, that's not going to work for me. Start telling me. And then I agreed to go to a Jewish Voice for Peace national meeting, and my whole life changed. It was at that moment I saw Jewish people I respected, people with incredible sense of morality and idealism, who and Judaism, who
Yeah.
spoke about it. And from that point on, my heart was broken as well, Sarah, but because I had to let go of Israel. And that, was very hard for me. It took a couple years.
It's important that you shared your stories, at the beginning of this, because we all come out of our own context, and this isn't just some abstract cause. I mean, it's personal for each one of us, right? It touches our hearts, breaks our hearts. We're meeting just days after a horrible shooting of Jews in Australia on the first day of Hanukkah. Those of us who are involved in solidarity for Palestine deal with accusations of anti-Semitism all the time. Yet we know that anti-Semitism is real. I mean, it's very real. And also, we can't let that stand in the way of our work for justice. Each one of us, the three of us, have personal stories. We've lost friendships. because of our activism. So I guess I'm just interested in hearing from both of you how you've navigated or how you're navigating, um, accusations of anti-Semitism, anti-Zionism, in terms of your own personal stories. You understand what I'm trying to ask you, right? How you deal with anti-Semitism is real, and so we stand with our Jewish friends. On the other hand, we can't let that stop our activism. You get what I'm trying to ask. So, Susan, you want to start, and then Sara after her.
Sure. First, let me say that as a Jewish person living in the United States, I've had two very minor comments made to me over my entire life that have been what I consider to be anti-Semitic personally. They were pretty minimal. They were ignorant people who I don't think really realized what they were saying. The big problem, of course, is this conflation of anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism. And as a member of Jewish Voice for Peace, I have lost a lot of Zionist friends, and I have been looked upon as what people call a self-hating Jew, a self-loathing Jew. And because Israel seems to define um, Judaism for many, certainly many American Jews. And in fact, the head of the ADL, Jonathan Greenblatt, has said anti-Zionism is anti-Semitism.
Yeah.
Um, I don't believe that. And I think criticism of Israel is perfectly legitimate and has nothing to do with, or should have nothing to do with, um, Judaism. I do think that sometimes it fosters anti-Semitism in some people, that it kind of extends. But I feel that the United States, for example, we were taught that Israel was the safest place for Jews, and I think actually it's the least safe place um, for Jews, although Australia certainly is coming up quickly there. Um, but the one problem that I want to mention that I think is a problem for us as Jewish people is that we see ourselves as victims, and we promote this concept of we have been victims for 2,000 years. And I think that that actually is a problem for us, and that, in my opinion, promotes anti-Semitism, because what's happened in the Jewish community is that we seem to have this somewhat elitist attitude. I heard a parent of um, an Indiana University student say the Jewish parents in Indiana are the Jewish Zionist parents are upset because Pamela Whitten did not single out Jews and anti-Semitism as a form of bigotry. She gave a speech in which she said that all bigotry and all discrimination is frowned upon. And the Jewish parents felt that anti-Semitism should be singled out. And I think actually that this becomes a problem for us because we seem to think we require special treatment. And I think that promotes anti-Semitism.
Sara?
Yeah. Well, I can say that, I haven't been doing this work for all that long compared to many others, but I would say in the past 2+ years, um, some of my friendships have been affected. Not just friendships with, colleagues who are rabbis or Jewish friends, but also friendships with Christians, other Christians who are maybe lean more Christian Zionist in their theology. And so those relationships have very much been affected. I have lost friends, but I've also tried very hard to keep the door open on some of those friendships and collegial relationships, knowing that, kind of, relating back to what Susan was saying about how there is, people are just grown up. Many of our Jewish colleagues and friends grow up with this in the air, in the water. Zionism is just part and parcel of what they learn. And so it can take a long time to unravel some of that. Um, and so I try to give people the benefit of the doubt, to believe in their humanity, to believe in their ability to change their minds, and just leave the door open for that whenever I can. In relation to the shooting that happened on Saturday night, I think at the end of the day, it's not about being pro-Palestine or pro-Israel or pro this group or pro that group. It's about being pro-humanity and pro-human rights for everyone, and against hate in all of its forms. And so, standing up against anti-Semitism, in addition to and alongside with standing up against Islamophobia or xenophobia or racism or any of the other forms of bigotry in our world, it's about being consistent. And the other thing that I think is really remarkable and worth lifting up about what happened on Saturday night, was that it was a Muslim man who stepped in to save lives, to bring down one of the gunmen, and which I think is indicative of the fact that our safety, all of our safety, is wrapped up in our solidarity for one another. It made me think about way back during the Arab Spring uprising, and there was this really powerful image um, of Muslims praying outside, and they were surrounded by a group of Christians holding hands, encircling them. And so the Christians were protecting the Muslims during that uprising. And here was a Muslim man trying to protect Jewish observers as they tried to celebrate Hanukkah. And I think it's just worth lifting up that it's in our solidarity that we find safety and security. It's not in isolating ourselves from one another into enclaves. It's by getting together and finding community with one another, and protecting each other.
I've been saying that Christian nationalism is to Christianity as Zionism is to Judaism. That ethnic cleansing and genocide is the natural outgrowth of both of these triumphalist, exceptionalist, and racist ideologies, Christian nationalism and Zionism. And so I've been saying too that it frustrates me that while many liberals rightly protest what's happening in our country in the No Kings protests and others, Zionism seems to get a pass. Your thoughts, Sarah?
Yeah, I mean, it's true. I think, like what I was just saying about consistency, if we're going to be speaking out against Christian nationalism and white supremacy in this country, and if we're going to be, calling out other forms of nationalism in places like India or other Middle Eastern countries, we also need to be talking about Zionism and Jewish supremacy that is running rampant in Israel and Palestine right now. And um, I I see them all as part of kind of systems of imperialism and colonialism, systems of domination. I think that, as a pacifist, as a Christian pacifist, I think that any form of domination of one group over another is wrong. And we need to be, opening doors, crossing borders, reaching out across lines of division, as opposed to creating in groups and out groups, as opposed to lifting up one people over another. And so, if you're going to be consistent in those values, I think it's important to call out, uh, I try to be sensitive to the fact that Zionism means different things to different people, and that I have heard many liberal Zionists say that, Zionism is just that all that it is the desire for self-determination and safety for the Jewish people. And if that was all that it was, I would be totally pro-Zionist. Unfortunately, if that's ever what it was, it's been co-opted now by a very, very violent, very, very racist Israeli government. And you can define it, I think the best way to define it is by the reality of the facts on the ground. And the reality of the facts on the ground is that people are dying and suffering. And so I think it calls for us to take a closer look at Zionism.
Susan?
Well, I'm listening to Sara, and I'm thinking one of the things about my education in the last 9 years has been listening to people, reading books, listening to podcasts. And one of the things that I've come to really understand for me personally is that this is an incredibly complex region, with a strategy, that I at times find hard to understand. I mean, I read books about Zionism and I find them to be incredibly complicated. There have been anti-Zionist Jewish organizations that have been very prominent over the last, 80 years, whatever. And so I realized that it's just not a simple issue. And I think that, the political aspects and the United States involvement and what it means to the United States to have Israel there is something that I don't fully grasp. And I think there's certainly out and out racism against Palestinians in the way that they are portrayed, and Arabs in general. Um, and I think that strategically, the United States promotes Israel for some balance of power in that part of the world. And so we are up against a government, as Sara said, that is not going to show compassion for the people of Palestine. I am amazed at times when I talk to friends who are Zionists and the way that they can close their eyes to what is happening. Recently saw the movie Nuremberg, which was very powerful and had scenes of the Holocaust. And I could not stop thinking about the fact that we, that Israeli Zionists have become the oppressors and are doing exactly what was done to them. And I find it hard to understand.
Both of you referred to the present government in Israel, but I I think I know both of you well enough to know that neither one of you are suggesting that if Netanyahu was replaced tomorrow, things would change, right? I mean, you're not. I guess I was suggesting that Zionism was the problem, not the present government. You're not. Are you disagreeing with that, or react to that, Susan and then Sara?
Yeah, no, I share your view. I mean, I think that, again, I'm speaking from a very personal point of view. I mean, I think that this is something that Zionists and many Jewish people have a very hard time giving up this view. It is an existential view.
Yeah.
They feel that it would be the end of Judaism, that this is a fight for survival. And
Yeah.
so I don't think um, that it's the present government that's creating this. They are perpetuating it.
Sarah.
Yeah, I mean, I agree as well. Even when there have been less fascist governments in place, less authoritarian leaders than Netanyahu, there has still been ethnic cleansing. There has still been mass bombing campaigns in Gaza, leading up to 2023, many times. And so this is not something that's unique to the current government, although I would say that the current government has gone to extremes, I think, that haven't been seen before, at least in my opinion, based on what I know. But no, and I think that there have been plenty of polls that show that the majority of Israelis, while they might not support Netanyahu, they do support what the military is doing. And they do support, the ethnic cleansing that's happening in the West Bank and the apartheid system. And so I totally, I'm with you.
I want to ask each one of you now a question. So, Susan, I'll start with you. As part of our tour in May, some of the Jewish Israeli folks with whom we met, ICAD's Jeff Halper, a retired Israeli soldier from Breaking the Silence, and I think your personal favorite, the Haaretz journalist Gideon Levy, if I remember correctly. Um, what did you learn from these activists from the Israeli Jewish left?
Oh, well, for me personally, I take great strength from people like this who are not afraid to speak out. These are all people who, especially, I think Jeff Halper and Gidon Levy, I think really speak out directly against what is happening. I think the Breaking the Silence fellow was more diplomatic and very careful in what he said. But when my resolve starts to flag, or when I feel that I can't keep pushing forward, I generally will listen to one of these two guys, and they help me to say I must keep speaking out as a Jewish person, to say that not all Jewish people feel that what is happening is right.
And as you and I mentioned, Indiana Center for Middle East Peace is hosting Jewish Israeli conscientious objector Sahar Vardi
Right.
in February on a mini U.S. tour, and she's another one of our heroes. Sarah, I mentioned that on Wednesday we're hosting a webinar on the Kairos Palestine Conference, and I know you've just finished a couple of weeks at church on the Kairos Palestine document 2.0, the one that was just released last month. Say a word about Kairos Palestine and the Kairos Palestine document.
It's well, first of all, it's an incredible document, and it was very difficult to distill it down into two 45-minute sessions and to try and get through all of it, because every single paragraph is gold in the statement. There's three parts to it. The first part is sort of a setting the describing the reality on the ground, the political reality on the ground in Gaza and the West Bank. And then the second part is speaking to Palestinian Christians, and the third part is speaking to Christians worldwide. And I think the part three is very powerful and very necessary I think in particular for Christians, but certainly anyone, with a heart for humanity, but I think particularly for Christians to pay attention to what our Christian siblings are saying in Palestine. There are still a lot of people out there who don't realize that there are Christians in Palestine. And I think the part that is most upsetting and most the part that I fear the most is what's happening to the Christian community in Palestine. They're disappearing. And the Kairos Palestine document goes into great detail about the necessity for the Christian community to remain there. This is the place where Christ was born. This is the land where Jesus had his ministry. This is the land of the early church, the first Christians. And so to think that that is in danger of disappearing from that part of the world, I think should spur Christians all over the world into action, and not to the exclusion. I don't say that to the exclusion of our Muslim siblings in Palestine, because we need to care about everyone, regardless of their religion. But I do think that there is something very, very important to the church and to the Christian community about maintaining that presence in the land.
Sara, just to follow up with you, we met with Dalia Kumsia, Maz and Jesse Kumsia. We met with Zugby. Also here when we sponsored his tour in Fort Wayne, you met with Munther Isaac, and we hosted him at Plymouth Church. Do you want to just say a word about what you've learned from these individuals?
Yeah. Um, I cannot overstate how much meeting Palestinian Christians has affected me personally and has informed my own faith. I think that Christians in the West, by and large, are very comfortable, even given what's been going on in our country right now, and our slide into authoritarianism. We're still relatively comfortable as Christians in the world. And I think we have a lot to learn from Christians who live in oppressive circumstances, and that includes Palestinian Christians, because they've been living in these under authoritarian fascist regimes for decades. And we have a lot to learn from them about what it means to remain steadfast in our faith in times of difficulty, in times of struggle, in times of great injustice. We have so much to learn from them, in regards to how to resist nonviolently and creatively. The Palestinians have have been so creative in their resistance, whether that's through music and art, whether it's through boycotts and economic resistance. Um, if we're wondering, as Christians in the West, as Christians in the United States, how are we supposed to respond to what's going on in our country right now? I think we look to our Palestinian siblings, especially those in the Christian community. We look to the Palestinian Christian community, and we learn from them.
Susan, thank you, Sara. We've titled this webinar, "A Jew and a Christian Walk into Palestine." It was your suggestion because you and Sara have done this in person in Indianapolis. Who else, and I mentioned folks on the Jewish left that we met with, who else from the trip really stands out for you and that moved you or inspired you or challenged your way of thinking?
Um, we went and visited in a Bedouin village, and I was very, very moved by that experience. Just
Khan al-Amr.
yeah, and Eid, right?
Yeah.
The man who spoke with us. Um, uh, and I think just to augment what Sara said, I think that one of the things that I experienced, I had this interesting distinction of being the only Jewish person on the trip. And it was at first a little daunting for me. I felt like I don't know how this is going to go. And it was absolutely wonderful for me to be with all of these people and to experience this whole situation from a different perspective. And I had a lot of wonderful conversations with people about it. And at the Bedouin village, I mean, I think that what I was struck by was this amazing ability to continue when things are so difficult. And I experienced that here in Indianapolis as well, with all of the people who have lost family members in Gaza. And yet, I cannot tell you how the Muslim community embraces us as members of Jewish Voice for Peace. We go to the mosque, we see them, and I felt the same thing when I was in Palestine with all of you. I couldn't believe how people could keep their hopes up and keep moving forward. There's something about these people that is, they are so strong and determined not to give up their land, their culture. And I felt that certainly when we visited the Bedouin village. So that was something very impressive to me.
Yeah, Khan al-Amr is always very moving for me. Um, Three others, and then I'll let both of you respond. We spent some time with Isa Amro at his home up in the hills overlooking Hebron. Fakhri Diab in Silwan, who's we stood in the rubble of his home that had been destroyed, and we met with young people from Eyewitness Silwan. There are others that we met with, of course, too, but you want to say a word about them, Susan, and then Sarah will turn over to you. I
Yes,
mean, say whatever you'd like. I mean, about any one of those. Pick and choose if you'd like.
well, absolutely. Those were all extremely impressive. I mean, sitting in this man's home that was no longer there and listening to him talk about what had happened was dramatic. But Silwan, that was a very impressive place. That these murals that they have put on the walls in Silwan as a way of saying we are watching, we are looking at you. You know, we are continuing on. Um, uh, it was quite amazing. We took a tour through the city, and they've drawn these murals everywhere, and these eyes, big eyes that sort of look out. And I think we saw it from a distance, and you could see um, these murals, and it was like saying, we're not giving up. We will continue to fight for our culture. And I think that I was so impressed by the poetry, the art, um, that all continues, even though they are under constant assault. We are asked to believe that they are primitive, that they are that Palestinians are savages, that they are animals. I was told by an Israeli woman that they are animals. And what's very clear is that they are anything but this. And um, they have an amazing culture. Just one aside, after I left Palestine, I was in Paris, and I saw an exhibit called 5,000 Years of Gaza. And I was taken aback because I realized that the only images we have are of these people in these encampments and living out in these tents. And I think that it works to the Israelis' advantages, because what we don't see is the incredible culture, the very high culture of the Palestinian people. And so I think that promotes further bigotry, unfortunately.
Sarah?
Yeah, well, I just have to ditto to everything Susan said about Solon, and one particular note about the murals that I thought was incredible was the fact that the eyes were some of them were not any particular person specifically, but there were they did do murals of specific people's eyes, including Issa Amro, and including and this was incredibly moving to me, George Floyd, which is it just speaks to the intersectionality of all of this work, and the recognition that injustice anywhere is injustice everywhere, right? That we're all in this together. And so that I found to be particularly moving. And then in regards to Issa Amro, who I was really pulling for him to win the Nobel Peace Prize this year, I was a little disappointed with the outcome of that. But Issa Amro is, for those who don't know who he is, has been called the Palestinian Gandhi. Although he will say, and he said to us that, every woman who takes care of her family is a Palestinian Gandhi. Every teacher who shows up at the classroom is a Palestinian Gandhi. Every nurse who shows up for their shift is a Palestinian Gandhi. So he downplays his importance, but I think what is really amazing to me, and this is amazing to me, not just about Issa, but a lot of the people we met, is the circumstances that he lives under. His home in Hebron is surrounded by settlers. Hebron is probably, the town in the West Bank that is most indicative of apartheid. He is harassed on a daily basis. His home has been broken into. His son has been threatened. He has been beat up. And yet he's so committed to nonviolence. He's ended up in the hospital because of attacks on him. He's been imprisoned, and he does not allow hate to overcome his his resilience and his steadfastness for the cause of Palestinian peace and justice. And I think something that he said to us when we met with him that I just found so incredible was when he said, at the time he was nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize, as were two other people that we met with, Jeff Halper, who is Jewish, and Mazin Kumsaya, who is Christian. And he said, if I win, I'm taking the two of them up there with me, and there'll be a Christian, a Jew, and a Muslim accepting the Nobel Peace Prize together. And that vision that he has for unity and for reaching out across lines of division is so inspiring to me, and I will always carry that with me.
Both of you have been involved, as you shared your stories, have been involved in other justice and human rights issues in your lives, LGBTQ plus rights, immigrant rights, environmental justice, racial justice, and more. I was slow on the uptick on this in my life, but millennials and Gen Zers get the intersection between justice for Palestinians and these other liberation struggles, what's come to be known as intersectionality. How do you do that in your activisms? Sarah, and then Susan.
Well, it's not easy, but it's not easy because there's so many causes.
Yeah, how do you make those connections? I guess I'm sorry, Sarah. Yeah, please.
Well, the connections to me are very obvious. And it's some of the things that we've already talked about in terms of resisting Christian nationalism means resisting religious nationalism in all forms. Being anti-racist means being anti-racist, not just in terms of anti-Black sentiment in the United States, but also anti-immigrant sentiment, and also, Zionism, and how that, the racism within that movement. in terms of immigration, understanding how our our own surveillance techniques over the border are imported directly from Israel. And if you want to read more about that, the Palestine Laboratory by Anthony Lowenstein is a great book to read about that. Um, it's just, for me, it's very clear how all of these things are connected. And so I think, at the end of the day, you have to um, find the cause that resonates the most with you and trust that others are doing the same for their causes, and that together, all of this work, we support each other in all of this work, that we're not in competition with each other. I'm not in competition with the people doing immigrant justice work, or people doing anti-racism work in the United States. We have to support each other's efforts, because, at the end of the day, we're all fighting kind of the same thing, which is imperialism and colonialism, and we're fighting for a more just world. And any way we can do that, any way we can chip away at those systems of domination, we're all in it together.
Susan?
Yeah. Well, and to build on that, I think a very interesting note is that I think that Jewish Voice for Peace, which is the largest anti-Zionist Jewish organization, but has many members who are not Jewish. We have Muslim members, Christian, atheist. I think it's what Sara is talking about, because there's a very, very strong, for example, queer presence in Jewish Voice for Peace. And I think that it's due to this feeling of intersectionality and the fact that we are speaking about any kind of domination. And so um, that it's a kind of this is a living example of, I think, what Sara's talking about, is that you can see our big meetings that we draw from people all over. And I think that it's a comfortable place for people to exist together.
This one's a little bit more difficult of a question because and it's one that I'm asking myself. So I'm going to ask you. Uh, Many of us have been at this work for years. I've been at it now for 26 years. There are others who are my teachers and my mentors who've been at it for twice that long. We're 70 something years in, to Palestinian dispossession, and yet things seem to be getting worse. Um, what what can we do differently? What can we do more effectively? What's our wedge into the issue where we can make a difference? You get what I'm trying to ask? What can we do that can be more effective? Sara, and then Susan.
Oh, thanks a lot.
Yeah, I saw you both pointing to the other person. It's a question I'm asking myself, right? Because I keep telling myself, well, it would be worse if people like us weren't doing what we're doing. But that's a cop out too, in a way. So I'm asking you the question I've been asking myself.
Well, can I ask a question of you first? When
Sure.
you say getting worse, what do you, what
Well,
do you,
look at the last 800 days. I mean, look what's happened in Gaza, and now the genocide has moved. I mean, it's always, ethnic cleansing has always been part of the Zionist agenda in the West Bank, but now, I mean, it's just right out in the open. The United States has stepped up its support. It looks more and more and more like Palestine's going to go the way of Tibet. The only reason that it isn't is because of the demographics, right? There's just so many Palestinians, but now they're talking about shipping them out of Gaza, I mean, things seem to be getting, I'll say it this way, things seem to be getting worse. So that's the backdrop to how I'm asking the question.
Well, let me just first say that um, hope is, I think, what ultimately has to drive us. And hope at the end of the day, and I will quote Václav Havel, as I often do, hope is not the certainty that well, I'll paraphrase. Hope is not the certainty that is not, hope is not optimism, that things are going to turn out the way that we want them to. Hope is not a certainty that we're going to have a certain outcome as a result of our efforts. Hope is doing the next best right thing. Hope is doing the right thing because it's the right thing to do, not because we know it's going to turn out the way we want it to. So that's number one, is that I think we have to hold on to hope in this work. And I think our Palestinian siblings teach us a lot about that. The second thing that I will say on a more practical level, an earlier webinar, Michael, that you hosted, there was a young woman whose name I'm not coming up with in this moment, but she spoke about the fact that a lot of us in this work have been trying to appeal to the conscience and ethics and moral heart of our opponents in this fight, and that has been a losing strategy. And that what we need to do is we need to make occupation costly. We need to make genocide costly. We need to make it costly for our politicians and for corporations to support apartheid and occupation and genocide. And I think that in terms of that work, I think JVP has been on the front lines of that in terms of trying to get cities and towns and states to divest from Israel bonds. I think BDS, Boycott, Divestment, and Sanctions, which is a Palestinian-led movement, is something that we should all be looking at in terms of pressuring companies to pressuring companies that are profiting off of all of this to change what they're doing, and pressuring governments and politicians by making it clear to them that their seats are in danger. And I think that that's happening more and more. I think that we're making progress along those lines. I just wish it was a lot faster.
Well, that's, Munther talks about costly solidarity. I mean, he quotes Bonhoeffer, right? Costly discipleship, costly solidarity. And so that's what he urges. And by the way, you're quoting from Palestinian Italian scholar Dalia Ismail, who said that liberals, the liberal mistake is that we just think if we can get a Zionist in the room or a Christian nationalist in the room and just talk with them a little bit and appeal to their conscience and morality, that they'll come around. And of course, you have to put pressure. And that's what she was talking about, the economic pressure. Thanks for reminding me. That's such good advice, and I had forgotten. That, Sarah. Thanks, Susan.
Well, I think Sara has mentioned all the points that I would have mentioned, and I think, again, I speak for Jewish Voice for Peace, because what's happening in Jewish Voice for Peace is that when I joined, it was simply a nonprofit. And, we were against the occupation. This was, prior to October 7th. We were against the occupation. We were for Palestinian rights. And what has happened is that this realization that we must become political, that we have to have BDS, we have to support BDS, we have to get rid of Israel bonds, we have to stop the flow of money into Israel, that those are the ways, the practical ways that we stop this kind of movement. And so what's happening is that we now have JVP Action, which is a completely political organization that and the energy is flowing in that direction, just what Sara talked about, that we are meeting with our Congress people. We are looking for ways to stop giving money Listen to Bernie Sanders, right? Stop sending money. At first, when October 7th happened, we were angry with Bernie because he wasn't supporting a ceasefire. We said, why isn't he doing that? And then we realized that really, what Bernie was talking about was, he said, stop sending money. And that if we had stopped funding Israel, what might have happened? That's really the question, the more practical question.
I want to give Susan and Sarah the last word, but before I do, just a couple of reminders. Our 19th Solidarity Tour to Palestine is taking place in early June with an optional post tour to Wadi Rum and Petra in Jordan. And so if you're interested in traveling to Palestine and experiencing what Sarah and Susan experienced, meeting with Jewish, Christian, and Muslim justice advocates and peacemakers, please be in touch with me. Also, a reminder that on Wednesday this week, in just 2 days, 1 o'clock Eastern Time, I'll be hosting a webinar about the recent 16th Bethlehem Kairos Palestine conference, where they issued a new call to the church, a moment of truth, faith in a time of genocide. And joining me are three people who were there: coordinator of Kairos Palestine, Rifat Kassis; apartheid-free movement leader, Pastor Allison Tanner; and Methodist representative to the UN, David Wildman. That's 1 o'clock Eastern Time this Wednesday. You can find the registration link in the chat or on our Indiana Center for Middle East Peace Facebook page. So, parting words. Susan.
Well, first of all, let me support your promotion of this trip. It was a life-changing experience for me. It was wonderful to be with other people who felt as I did, and for me, as a Jewish person, I came away with a different feeling about Christianity. And I felt much more comfortable. And I began thinking in a more spiritual way about some of my own ideas. So I feel, like Sara said, I feel hopeful. I'm not going to stop. I need to keep speaking out even when I feel afraid. And I think that this experience for me really encouraged me to do that.
Well, we're really appreciative of you, Susan, and appreciative of JVP Indianapolis and Jewish Voice for Peace nationally. And I'll just put a plug in for Beth Myers and Jewish Voice for Peace Action. And and as you mentioned, you don't have to be Jewish to be a member of JVP. Check them out. Check them out because they're doing great work, and we need Jewish Voice for Peace. We who are not Jewish, we need them. They take a lot of the blows on behalf of the rest of us because they're Jewish, speaking out from an anti-Zionist voice. So, Susan, thank you. It's good to have you here.
Thank you.
Sarah?
Yeah, I would echo what Susan said about the trip. And I think one of the things for me that it really, really impressed upon me, because we spoke with Christians, Muslims, and Jews on this trip, it really, really reinforced what was a belief of mine before going on the trip, which is that at the heart of all of our traditions is love, is connection and community and solidarity. And so, no matter what your religious background is, no matter where you're coming from, the heart of all of this is that we have a love for our neighbors. We have a love for this world that we're in, and we have a love of peace and justice and a commitment to that. that crosses every single line and barrier. And so I think, like, as I mentioned earlier, solidarity with each other is what's going to uh, get us through and across the finish line. And we may not see it in our lifetime, but faith, the sort of samud and steadfastness that we learn from our Palestinian friends to keep going, and to keep going with hope and faith.
Thank you, Sarah, very much, and thanks to it for what you do, not only at Plymouth Congregational Church, but also with the United Church of Christ Movement for Palestinian Solidarity. And two final things. Um, Number one, Zugby Zugby and others remind us what Sarah said earlier. Hope is not a feeling, hope is what you do. And secondly, I was looking at the name Beth Myers on the screen. Beth, who's a friend of ours who traveled with me to South Africa recently. Of course, the head of JVP Action is Beth Miller, not Beth Myers. So thanks, Beth, for that reminder. All righty, everyone. Susan, Sarah, you blessed us today with your presence. Thank you very much. Bye now.